In the years leading up to the Second World War, German officers and soldiers held a deeply ingrained sense of superiority when it came to small arms. Their Mauser Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifle was considered the pinnacle of precision, and the MP-38 and MP-40 submachine guns were seen as perfectly balanced weapons for mechanized infantry. When they first heard about the American Thompson submachine gun, many dismissed it outright. To them, it looked like a heavy, inelegant piece of equipment, more like a relic of gang wars in Chicago than a serious tool for disciplined soldiers on the battlefield. German propaganda reinforced this image, often mocking the Thompson as a gangster pistol, not worthy of being placed alongside the refined German arsenal. The truth was that the Thompson's early history played right into those stereotypes. Designed at the end of the First World War by General John T. Thompson, it missed its chance to see action in that conflict and instead found a place in the turbulent streets of Prohibition-era America. Bank robbers, bootleggers, and mobsters made headlines with the Tommy gun, its curved drum magazine, and distinctive profile splashed across newspapers. By the 1930s, Hollywood cemented its image as the weapon of choice for criminals. German officers, studying foreign developments, took note, but their conclusion was that the Americans were unserious if this was the weapon they intended to field in war. Yet beneath their mockery was an underestimation that would prove costly. The Thompson was indeed heavy, weighing close to 11 pounds when loaded, and its rate of fire, nearly 700 rounds per minute, devoured ammunition quickly. To a German soldier drilled in discipline and precision, such a weapon seemed wasteful and impractical. They prided themselves on hitting targets at long distances, while the Thompson was designed for short, brutal encounters where volume of fire mattered more than careful marksmanship. German officers scoffed at this, saying no professional army would ever issue such a firearm on a large scale. This arrogance was especially strong among veterans of the early campaigns. In Poland, Norway, France, and the Balkans, German infantry moved with an air of invincibility, equipped with their proven rifles and submachine guns. When whispers reached them that American forces were rearming with a strange-looking submachine gun, the laughter spread through the ranks. In soldiers' diaries and letters, the Thompson was referred to derisively as the typewriter, not as a compliment to its sound, but as a jab at how clumsy and excessive it seemed. The consensus was that it belonged in the hands of criminals, not soldiers. However, the German dismissal masked a blind spot in their military thinking. They placed enormous emphasis on technical perfection and standardized doctrines, but war often favored adaptability and brute force. The Thompson, for all its flaws, offered exactly that, a brutal, close-range solution in chaotic battlefields where precision was secondary. Its 45 ACP round, slow but heavy, delivered punishing stopping power that could stagger an opponent even through cover. German soldiers, confident in their lighter 9mm MP-40, had no idea how different the Thompson would feel in the dust and noise of real combat. The irony was that while Germans mocked, American soldiers were quietly training with the weapon and discovering its strengths. U.S. Marines experimented with it in the interwar years, and by the time the Lend-Lease Act began supplying Allied nations, even the British Home Guard and Commandos had access to early shipments. Reports from British units hinted that the Thompson was not just a gangster's toy, but a serious battlefield weapon. German intelligence analysts noted these shipments but underestimated their importance. This pattern of dismissal would follow the Germans into the deserts of North Africa, where the Thompson would first appear in significant numbers against the Afrika Korps. What began as laughter over a gangster gun would soon turn into grudging recognition. But in those early days, when German soldiers scoffed at its bulk and mocked its American origins, They had no idea that by the end of the war, over 1.5 million Thompsons would be pouring across the battlefields of Europe and the Pacific, rewriting the way infantry combat was fought. When the United States formally entered the war after the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Thompson submachine gun was already in limited military service, but it had never been embraced wholeheartedly by the U.S. Army. Many officers saw it as an expensive and specialized tool, better suited for law enforcement or small commando-style operations than for the average infantryman. Early production models, like the M1928A1 with its finned barrel and distinctive drum magazine, were notoriously costly and time-consuming to produce. In a time when the U.S. military was suddenly tasked with arming millions of soldiers, cost and speed of production became decisive factors. The War Department hesitated to place the Thompson at the center of its infantry strategy. Despite these reservations, the Thompson found its way into the hands of select units. U.S. Marines had been among its earliest adopters, using it in small-scale clashes in Central America during the 1920s and 1930s, where it proved valuable in jungle fighting against guerrillas. When the war broke out in Europe and Asia, the British, desperate for arms, requested and received large shipments of Thompsons through the Lend-Lease program. Commandos wielded them during daring raids along the French coast, and Home Guard units drilled with them in preparation for a possible German invasion. Reports from these encounters filtered back to Washington, reminding American planners that this gangster gun was proving effective in the hands of their closest ally. Still, the weapon had its flaws. Soldiers complained about its weight, nearly 5 kilograms when loaded, and its appetite for ammunition. The drum magazine, capable of holding 50 rounds, was heavy and rattled noisily, drawing unwanted attention. Many American troops preferred the lighter 20 or 30-round box magazines, which became standard as the war progressed. The slow-moving .45 ACP round also lacked the range of a rifle bullet, making it unsuitable for open-field engagements. These limitations convinced some U.S. commanders to treat the Thompson as a specialist's weapon, ideal for officers, paratroopers, engineers, or rangers, but not for the rank-and-file infantry. Nevertheless, the growing demands of global war changed everything. By early 1942, production was ramping up, and contracts were signed with companies like Auto Ordnance and Savage Arms to turn out tens of thousands of Thompsons. A simpler version, the M1, was introduced, stripped of the costly extras like the finned barrel and complicated drum system. The M1A1 variant followed soon after, featuring a fixed firing pin and even faster manufacturing time. These design changes transformed the Thompson from a luxury firearm into a mass-producible weapon, something the U.S. war machine could churn out by the hundreds of thousands. In training camps across America, new recruits were introduced to the Thompson. At first, many echoed the same doubts once voiced by German soldiers. It was heavy, wasteful, and unsuited for long-range fighting. But when recruits practiced house-to-house clearing drills, trench assaults, and ambushes, the advantages of the weapon became obvious. Its automatic fire at close range could overwhelm enemies in seconds. The sheer stopping power of the .45 cartridge impressed even skeptics. Soon, photographs of U.S. soldiers drilling with Thompsons became a common sight, signaling its growing role in America's preparations for global war. By the time the first large-scale American ground operations unfolded in North Africa, the Thompson had already begun to carve its reputation. The Germans who had once sneered at it would encounter it firsthand in the sands around Tunisia. But in these early stages, it remained a weapon caught between two identities, mocked by the enemy as a gangster's gun, and treated with cautious respect by its own army. That balance was about to tip dramatically once combat exposed its true potential. the deserts of North Africa, became the true testing ground for the Thompson submachine gun in American hands. When U.S. troops arrived to fight alongside the British in Operation Torch in November 1942, German soldiers of Rommel's Africa Corps soon faced something they had previously mocked. For the first time, in the chaos of close-quarter fighting among wadis, ruined villages, and desert fortifications, the Thompson revealed itself not as a gangster's toy, but as a battlefield equalizer. In open desert engagements, the Carabiner 98K rifle remained supreme, its long-range precision unmatched. But war rarely played out in wide-open expanses. When battles shifted to tight terrain, a stone farmhouse turned into a German strongpoint, a narrow alley in Tunis, or an armored column ambushed at dusk, the Thompson came into its own. German soldiers, advancing confidently with their MP-40s and bolt-action rifles, often found themselves shocked by the withering bursts of .45 caliber fire erupting from American positions. The weapon's heavy rounds shredded cover and delivered bone-breaking force, something the lighter 9mm cartridges of the MP-40 could not replicate. Accounts from the North African campaign tell of German troops initially laughing when they captured Thompsons from fallen U.S. soldiers, only to change their tune after firing them. A captured diary entry from a German corporal described the recoil as violent but devastating, noting that the weapon hits like a hammer at close distance. Rommel's intelligence officers filed reports warning that American infantry units seemed to carry an unusual number of submachine guns compared to their German counterparts, making them formidable in assaults on fortified positions. The fighting around Kasserine Pass in early 1943 further reinforced the weapon's reputation. German units, pressing against inexperienced American forces, expected to roll over them with ease. But even as the U.S. Army reeled from mistakes in coordination and tactics, individual firefights told a different story. Squads armed with Thompsons poured staggering volumes of lead into advancing Germans, forcing them to take cover and often breaking the momentum of their assaults. German soldiers who had scoffed at the weapon's bulk began to speak of it with wary respect, acknowledging that at 30 or 40 meters it was every bit as lethal as their own submachine guns, and in many cases, even more so. One of the most striking differences lay in psychological impact. The Thompson's heavy, chest-thudding bursts carried an intimidation factor. Its distinctive chop-chop sound echoed across battlefields, and German troops soon learned to recognize it. Veterans of the Africa Corps admitted in post-war interviews that hearing a Thompson open up in the darkness of a night raid could unsettle even hardened men. The same soldiers who had once called it a gangster gun now found themselves facing its brutal utility, and some began carrying captured Thompsons when their ammunition situation allowed it. The North African campaign did not just showcase the weapon's strengths to German soldiers, it also reshaped American doctrine. Reports from officers highlighted the Thompson's ability to give small squads disproportionate firepower. While the bolt-action Springfield rifles remained standard, commanders increasingly requested more submachine guns to handle the unpredictable close-range nature of desert warfare. As production in the U.S. soared, these requests were met, ensuring that the Thompson would no longer be a curiosity, but a mainstay. By the end of the Tunisian campaign, German soldiers were no longer laughing at the Thompson. What they once dismissed as a relic of American crime now stood as a weapon they grudgingly respected, and feared in the right circumstances. Yet this was only the beginning. The true transformation of the Thompson would come not in the deserts of Africa, but in the massive wave of industrial production that followed. By mid-1943, the industrial might of the United States was beginning to reshape the global balance of the war. What had started as cautious, small-scale production of the Thompson suddenly accelerated into a flood of weapons pouring out of American factories. Once considered a specialty firearm, the Thompson now became a symbol of mass production. The U.S. Army Ordnance Department pushed contracts through companies like Savage Arms and Auto Ordnance, demanding simplified designs that could be built quickly and cheaply. The result was the M1 and the M1A1, stripped of the decorative fins and drum magazines of earlier versions, streamlined for one purpose only: war. Factories in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and Utica, New York, ran day and night, producing thousands of Thompsons every week. Workers who had never touched a battlefield, women, riveters, machinists, and assembly line crews, became the unseen backbone of the weapon's proliferation. Each gun that rolled off the line represented not just industrial capacity, but also America's ability to adapt. The gangster's gun was being reborn as the soldier's gun, stamped with steel parts rather than painstakingly machined components, cutting production time from hours to minutes. German intelligence began to notice. Reports filtered back to Berlin that American units were increasingly saturated with submachine guns, a trend at odds with German doctrine, which still relied heavily on bolt-action rifles and light machine guns. For the Wehrmacht, the MP-40 remained a platoon leader's or squad leader's tool rather than a weapon distributed broadly among enlisted men. The sheer scale of American production meant that entire squads could be reinforced with Thompsons, creating formations capable of unleashing overwhelming close-range firepower. By 1944, shipments of Thompsons were not only arming U.S. soldiers, but also Allied forces across the globe. British, Canadian, Australian, and even Soviet troops received the weapon under Lend-Lease agreements. Soviet reports praised the Thompson's durability and stopping power, though they noted its heavy weight compared to their own PPSH-41. In some Red Army units, soldiers coveted Thompsons as prized alternatives to their standard gear. This global spread of the weapon magnified the impression among German soldiers that the Americans were capable of drowning the battlefield in automatic fire. The numbers tell the story. By the summer of 1944, close to 1 million Thompsons had been manufactured, with production still climbing. What the Germans once ridiculed as an impractical gangster's toy was now appearing in such massive numbers that it could no longer be ignored. Even captured stockpiles revealed the staggering scale. After engagements in Italy and the Mediterranean, German units reported seizing crates of brand-new Thompsons, sometimes still coated in factory grease, evidence of the relentless American supply chain that kept its troops flush with weapons. For German soldiers at the front, this meant a growing awareness that wherever they turned, Thompsons were present. Whether in the hands of American Rangers storming Italian cliffs, British commandos raiding coastal positions, or Soviet soldiers advancing in Eastern Europe, the weapon was everywhere. Each encounter drove home the same point. The laughter and mockery of the early years had been misplaced. The Thompson was not a novelty. It was becoming one of the most widely distributed and feared firearms of the war. As production numbers soared, German troops began to alter their own behavior. Some squads collected captured Thompsons and pressed them into service when ammunition could be obtained. Field reports from the Eastern Front even described German soldiers trading cigarettes with Soviet troops in exchange for Thompson magazines, a quiet acknowledgment of its battlefield value. The industrial flood could not be denied. America was proving not only that it could produce the Thompson in astonishing numbers, but also that it could deliver them to every corner of the conflict. The tide was turning, and nowhere would this become clearer than in the next great arena of war, the Pacific jungles, where the Thompson's brutal efficiency would reach its peak. While German soldiers were beginning to grasp the reality of America's industrial firepower in Europe and North Africa, halfway across the globe, the Thompson was forging a reputation of its own in an entirely different kind of war. In the Pacific theater, where battles were fought in steaming jungles, tangled undergrowth, and fortified island caves, the Thompson proved itself not just useful, but indispensable. The weapon's heavy .45 caliber rounds and short effective range matched the environment perfectly, turning it into a favored tool of U.S. Marines and Army units slogging their way across Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands. Here, the Thompson's flaws, its weight and limited long-range capability, mattered far less. The average firefight in the Pacific took place at distances of less than 50 yards, often with enemies appearing suddenly from behind a palm tree, bamboo thicket, or cave mouth. In such moments, a burst from the Thompson could mean the difference between life and death. The .45 ACP round had a brutal stopping power, capable of halting a charging soldier, even if he had been hit multiple times with smaller caliber rounds. Against Japanese troops, who were trained in bayonet charges and often fought with near-suicidal determination, the Thompson's sheer force was invaluable. Japanese soldiers who encountered it quickly realized its lethality. Many diaries recovered after battles recorded impressions of thunderous American fire at close quarters, describing how squads could be torn apart in seconds. Survivors wrote of the psychological effect of hearing its distinctive rapid-fire rhythm cutting through the chaos of battle. The weapon's sound was unmistakable, a harsh mechanical roar that seemed almost constant in jungle skirmishes where ammunition flowed freely. Some Japanese troops derisively nicknamed it the Chattering Demon, but behind the mockery lay genuine fear. For U.S. Marines, the Thompson became a badge of prestige. Photographs from the Guadalcanal campaign show leathernecks clutching the weapon as they trudged through mud and monsoon rains, its compact frame slung across their chests for instant readiness. Officers and NCOs often preferred it over the cumbersome M1 Garand when leading men into assaults on Japanese bunkers. In the claustrophobic confines of a dugout or trench, the Thompson's ability to clear a space with a single sweep of automatic fire made it a weapon of choice. Stories spread through the ranks of Marines who had held positions against overwhelming Japanese assaults with nothing but their Thompsons and stacks of magazines. The Pacific battles also revealed the weapon's durability. Despite the corrosive effects of heat, humidity, and salt air, Thompsons kept firing. Maintenance was simple compared to more delicate firearms, and its robust construction gave confidence to men who knew their lives might depend on a split second of reliability. Even when caked in mud or soaked in rain, it remained functional, earning trust and affection among those who carried it. Captured Japanese accounts showed grudging admiration as well. Some soldiers noted that American squads often carried multiple Thompsons, which, combined with grenades and supporting fire, made frontal assaults on U.S. positions deadly. A few even attempted to use captured examples, though the scarcity of .45 ACP ammunition limited this. Still, the weapon's reputation grew steadily in the minds of both sides. The Pacific theater solidified the Thompson's role not just as a supplemental firearm, but as a cornerstone of American infantry tactics in environments where speed and overwhelming firepower determined survival. By 1943, as word spread back to Europe of its fearsome performance in the jungles, German soldiers began to hear unsettling rumors. The gangster gun they had once mocked was carving a bloody path through another enemy on the other side of the world. And soon enough, they would feel its full force themselves when the Allies landed in France. By the summer of 1944, the Allied invasion of Normandy marked the largest amphibious assault in history. For German soldiers awaiting the attack behind their Atlantic Wall fortifications, the expectation was to face waves of Allied troops armed primarily with rifles and machine guns, not unlike their own. What they encountered instead was an overwhelming concentration of automatic fire, much of it delivered by the very weapon they had spent years ridiculing. The Thompson was now present in such staggering numbers that its distinctive bursts echoed across hedgerows, villages, and beaches from dawn until dusk. When American paratroopers dropped into the dark skies over Normandy on the night of June 5th, many carried Thompsons as their primary weapon. The submachine gun's compact size made it ideal for parachute drops, and in the chaos of scattered landings, its ability to deliver heavy close-range fire proved invaluable. German defenders, trying to reorganize under fire, were shocked at the volume of lead unleashed by small, isolated groups of Americans armed with Thompsons. A handful of paratroopers could pin down much larger German units simply through relentless bursts of .45 caliber rounds, forcing the enemy to believe they were under attack by a much stronger force. On the beaches of Omaha, Utah, and beyond, Thompsons were carried by officers, engineers, and assault troops tasked with clearing bunkers and trenches. German machine gun nests, so feared in the planning stages of Operation Overlord, often fell silent after short, brutal firefights where American soldiers used their Thompsons to overwhelm defenders at point-blank range. Survivors among the Wehrmacht described these encounters with a mixture of disbelief and horror. The gangster gun that had once been mocked as impractical was now cutting through veteran defenders who had survived years of combat. As the battle moved inland, the hedgerows of Normandy created a nightmarish landscape for infantry. Dense earth embankments and narrow lanes forced soldiers into close encounters where rifles lost much of their advantage. It was in this terrain that the Thompson became legendary. German soldiers accustomed to duels at longer distances suddenly found themselves ambushed at ranges of 20 meters or less. Bursts from Thompsons shredded patrols before they could react, leaving behind the eerie silence of the French countryside, broken only by the sound of birds and distant artillery. Reports circulated among German divisions of American units, seemingly bristling with automatic firepower. While the German army had its own formidable machine guns like the MG-42, those were crew-served and required coordination. The Thompson, by contrast, placed devastating firepower into the hands of individual infantrymen. Squads could storm a farmhouse, barn, or fortified hedgerow with terrifying efficiency. German accounts from the battles around Carentan and Saint-Lô recorded heavy losses from close-range assaults, where Thompsons were employed en masse. The scale of production meant that by the time of Normandy, over 1 million Thompsons were in circulation. For German troops who had long dismissed the weapon, the shock was not merely in its effectiveness, but in its sheer ubiquity. Everywhere they turned, from the paratroopers in the skies to the infantry storming the villages, the Thompson was present. The mockery that had once filled barracks conversations was replaced by grim recognition. The Americans had not only embraced the weapon, but had armed their armies with it on an industrial scale that Germany could never hope to match. The psychological impact of this realization was profound. German prisoners captured in Normandy often mentioned the surprise of facing so many submachine guns, a departure from their expectations of rifle-heavy Allied forces. The Thompson had become more than a weapon. It was a symbol of American industrial might and adaptability, embodying the shift from derision to fear among German soldiers who now faced its roar in every engagement. By late 1944, as the Allies pressed deeper into France and toward the German border, the psychological reputation of the Thompson had taken on a life of its own. What had begun as ridicule, jokes about a Chicago typewriter or gangster's toy, had transformed into whispered stories of entire squads annihilated in seconds by its heavy bursts. German soldiers who had once laughed at the weapon's bulk now carried a lingering unease whenever they faced American patrols. Veterans began to caution replacements, warning them that the Americans often carried more submachine guns than expected and that underestimating the Thompson could be fatal. The respect was not merely anecdotal. German field reports reveal growing concern about the proliferation of American automatic weapons. In engagements along the Siegfried Line, German units noted that U.S. infantry squads often advanced with a higher ratio of Thompsons compared to German MP-40s. This meant that in close combat, where decisions were measured in heartbeats, Americans frequently had the advantage. German doctrine emphasized the squad machine gun, the MG-42 or MG-34, as the backbone of infantry tactics. But this required coordination and setup. The Thompson, however, placed devastating automatic fire in the hands of individual soldiers without preparation. In the ruined cities of France and Belgium, this disparity became glaringly apparent. Urban combat turned every block into a deadly ambush zone. German soldiers manning defensive positions described the shock of hearing Thompsons rattling from cellars, stairwells, or behind shattered walls. Entire squads could storm a building with a ferocity unmatched by rifle fire alone. One veteran later recalled the terror of holding a second-floor room in Aachen when a handful of American soldiers burst in, Thompsons blazing. The fight lasted less than a minute, and only 2 Germans survived. The Thompson also carried symbolic weight. Its iconic silhouette and roaring bursts became closely associated with American troops in the minds of German soldiers. Prisoners interrogated after the Battle of the Bulge admitted that the sound of Thompsons echoing through the forests struck fear into their hearts. Not just because of the firepower, but because it signaled the presence of determined, aggressive assault troops. The same men who had once dismissed it as wasteful now considered it a hallmark of the American infantryman's resilience and confidence. Stories of German soldiers using captured Thompsons grew more common. Some frontline troops admitted to preferring them over their MP-40s when ammunition could be scavenged. The weapon's stopping power in close quarters was undeniable. Accounts surfaced of Waffen-SS units seizing Thompsons from American casualties and incorporating them into their arsenals, a quiet testament to how far perceptions had shifted. Where once they had sneered at the idea of wielding such a primitive firearm, necessity and respect made them pragmatic. This shift in attitude did not go unnoticed at the command level. German officers began to warn that the Americans' mass use of submachine guns reflected a dangerous evolution in infantry tactics. Letters from officers to Berlin requested more MP-40s or the development of improved models, noting that German soldiers were increasingly outgunned in short-range combat. The Sturmgewehr 44, Germany's revolutionary assault rifle, was already in limited circulation, but it was far too late and too scarce to counter the tidal wave of Thompsons. By the winter of 1944, German soldiers no longer mocked the Thompson. They feared it, respected it, and in many cases envied the Americans for having it in such abundance. What had started as a joke in barracks conversations had become a grim reality on the battlefield. The Thompson was not just a weapon anymore. It was a symbol of America's ability to overwhelm the Reich both with industry and with firepower, turning derision into dread in the minds of its once proud enemies. As the war drew to a close in 1945, the Thompson submachine gun had fully shed its image as a curiosity or relic of American gangsters. It had become one of the defining weapons of the Allied victory, and German soldiers knew it. From the beaches of Normandy to the streets of Aachen, From the hedgerows of France to the bridges over the Rhine, its presence had been constant, overwhelming, and unforgettable. The weapon once mocked in German barracks was now etched into the memories of those who had survived its devastating bursts. The numbers told the story most starkly. By the end of the war, more than 1.5 million Thompsons had been produced, a figure that dwarfed the German ability to match. America's factories had turned what began as a limited, expensive firearm into an icon of mass industrial warfare. German commanders admitted in after-action reports and post-war interrogations that their soldiers were outarmed in close quarters, not merely because of the Thompsons' effectiveness, but because of how many were in circulation. It was not 1 or 2 per platoon. It was dozens, carried by officers, engineers, paratroopers, and infantry assault teams alike. For the German soldier, this ubiquity was disheartening. The mockery of earlier years had given way to resignation. No matter where they fought the Americans, the Thompson was always there. Captured German diaries described the frustration of facing wave after wave of attacks, where every corner seemed to spit lead from a Thompson. The psychological toll was immense, feeding into the broader sense of inevitability as the Reich collapsed under the weight of Allied manpower, resources, and technology. Yet the Thompsons' legacy did not end with German respect. Across Europe and Asia, the weapon left its imprint on the post-war world. Many of the Thompsons produced never left service immediately. Instead, they were distributed to Allied nations, police forces, and even resistance groups. The Soviet Union had received thousands under Lend-Lease, and captured examples spread throughout Eastern Europe. Chinese nationalist and communist forces both wielded them in the Chinese Civil War, while British colonial troops carried them into conflicts in Malaya and India. The weapon's reputation as a symbol of close-range dominance carried into the Cold War era. For Germany, the irony was bitter. The nation that had mocked the Thompson as a crude and wasteful weapon had, in the end, been forced to respect it as one of the tools of their defeat. Their own attempts to innovate, like the Sturmgewehr 44, represented a belated recognition that mass-produced automatic firepower was the future of warfare, a lesson the Americans had already demonstrated with the Thompson years earlier. In the collective memory of the war, the Thompson became a symbol of American grit and industrial might. Photographs of GIs clutching their Thompsons through mud, snow, and rubble came to define the image of the U.S. infantryman. To German soldiers who had survived the conflict, the sight and sound of the weapon remained unforgettable, a reminder of how arrogance had blinded them in the early years, and how underestimating an enemy's tools could carry a deadly cost. Thus, the arc was complete. The Thompson had traveled from the streets of Chicago to the deserts of North Africa, the jungles of the Pacific, and the villages of Normandy. German soldiers had mocked it, sneered at it, and dismissed it. But by the war's end, they no longer laughed. They knew it as the weapon that had poured across the battlefields in numbers they could scarcely comprehend, a weapon that embodied the unstoppable flood of Allied strength. 1.5 million Thompsons, roaring in unison, had helped bury the Reich.